Three men walked into a palace to remake the world. On June 28, 1919, inside the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, during the Paris Peace Conference, their decisions would shape the next century and eventually lead to the deaths of 60 million people. Woodrow Wilson, George Clemenceau, and David Lloyd George weren't just negotiating peace. They were each fighting their own battles. Wilson pushed for idealism, Clemenceau sought vengeance, and Lloyd George aimed for political survival. Their clash produced a treaty that didn't just fail to prevent another world war, it made one almost inevitable. Even the US Senate refused to ratify the treaty, leaving the League of Nations weakened from the start. But before the ink was dry, one leader was already pushing for a plan that would shock even his allies. George Clemenceau entered the Paris Peace Conference determined to make sure Germany could never threaten France again. French society was still reeling from the devastation of World War I. Over 1 million French soldiers had died, and entire towns had been wiped off the map. Public opinion demanded harsh penalties, and Clemenceau responded with proposals that went far beyond what his allies expected. Behind closed doors, he pushed secret maps showing radical plans, dividing Germany into smaller states along old regional lines and moving the frontier to the Rhine River. French generals argued for annexing the Rhineland, not just for territory, but to create a permanent buffer zone that would stop any future German invasion before it reached French soil. The Rhineland was more than just a strip of land. It was a vital industrial region and a strategic shield. By placing it under French control, Clemenceau hoped to cripple Germany's economic power and ensure France's security for generations. Some French proposals even suggested reviving the patchwork of states that existed before German unification in 1871, breaking Germany's strength at its core. Clemenceau's team presented these ideas to the Allies, but Britain and America were alarmed. Lloyd George saw the risks of a fragmented, unstable Germany at the heart of Europe. Woodrow Wilson objected on principle, believing such measures violated the spirit of his 14 points and could lead to further unrest. As negotiations unfolded, it became clear that France's vision for the post-war order was at odds with its partners. Some observers, like historian Michael Nyberg, later pointed out that the new map of Europe actually left Germany surrounded by smaller states and removed Russia as a potential ally for France, showing just how complicated these territorial decisions were. The French push for Germany's dismemberment never made it into the final treaty, but the desire for security shaped every demand Clemenceau made. These deep divisions among the Allies set the stage for a treaty full of compromises and contradictions. As the details were hammered out, one clause in particular would ignite anger in Germany and become the centerpiece of future propaganda. Article 231, the War Guilt Clause, stood out in the Treaty of Versailles for its bluntness and impact. It declared that Germany accepts responsibility for all loss and damage, placing the blame for World War I squarely on German shoulders. For many Germans, this was more than a legal statement. It was a national humiliation broadcast to the world. The outrage was immediate. German delegates protested and hesitated to sign. They believed the war's origins were complex. Many pointed to Russia's early mobilization as a key factor, and they saw it as deeply unfair that Austria-Hungary and other powers were not similarly blamed. The Allies insisted on the clause as a foundation for reparations, but to Germans, it felt like an accusation designed to keep them down forever. The War Guilt Clause quickly became a rallying point for nationalist anger. It wasn't just about pride. This single sentence justified the massive reparations that crushed Germany's economy. As the government struggled to pay, it printed more money, and the economy collapsed into hyperinflation. Savings vanished overnight. Shops raised prices by the hour. Families who once felt secure found themselves desperate. This chaos didn't just hurt bank accounts. It shook faith in the new Weimar Republic and created fertile ground for radical solutions. That's where extremist parties stepped in. The Nazis, in particular, seized on the stab in the back myth, claiming that Germany hadn't truly been defeated on the battlefield, but had been betrayed by politicians, especially Jews and communists, who accepted the humiliating terms. This myth became central to Nazi propaganda. In 1923, Adolf Hitler and his supporters even tried to overthrow the government in the Munich beer hall putsch, waiving the war guilt clause as proof of betrayal. The Nazis promised to tear up the treaty, restore Germany's honor, and punish those they blamed for the nation's suffering. While historians debate whether Versailles alone caused World War II, there's no question the war guilt clause left deep scars. It fueled conspiracy theories, political violence, and a hunger for revenge. Resentment simmered through the 1920s and 1930s, shaping German politics in ways the treaty's authors never imagined. The legacy of Versailles reveals what can happen when peace is built on punishment and politics rather than true reconciliation. Looking back at the Treaty of Versailles, it's clear that its harsh terms, territorial losses, reparations, and strict military limits destabilized Germany and fueled resentment. These choices didn't just fail to secure peace for France, they created the conditions for extremist movements to thrive. As historian Nyberg puts it, Versailles was part of the recipe, but not the only ingredient for the disaster that followed. What do you think? Could a more balanced treaty have changed the course of history and prevented World War II? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective helps us all think more critically about the past and its lessons. Could a genuine settlement have stopped the next war before it started? If you think the past still shapes the present, if you believe history gives context to the chaos, and if you're into breaking down today's issues through a historical lens, then hit like, smash subscribe, and turn on that bell. Because around here, it's not just news, it's today in context.